Hey guys, what's up? It's Amanda. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to another video. So today's video has been highly requested and I actually filmed something very similar like probably 2 years ago. This is going to be basically tips and tricks to interviews for nursing jobs, whether it be your first nursing job or not. This is pretty much relevant to you. So like I said, I found this back in 2019 before I actually had gotten my first nursing job, but I had interviewed a few times, and yeah, but now I feel like as a nurse I have a little more to add of experiences and stuff. So like I said, my name is Amanda. I have been a nurse for almost 2 years in July. Wow, that's crazy. And I work in postpartum as a night shift nurse, so take care of new babies and moms and dads and families and all that fun stuff. So I am gonna quick just kind of give you a little rundown of how interviewing went for me when I was a new grad nurse, and then talk a little bit about like when to start looking for jobs and applying. Then I'm going to go into some tips and tricks and commonly asked questions that you should probably kind of have an idea of what you're going to say. And then lastly, I'm going to give some postpartum specific advice, because I've had a lot of people who are super interested in becoming postpartum nurses. So for me personally, I think I had 3 interviews total. So I'm gonna go through the different jobs that I applied for and then kind of walk through that. So my first job that I actually applied for was a nurse residency program, and nurse residency programs typically have a more extensive application process and have applications that are open a lot sooner. For example, the one I applied for, applications I believe were due in like November, and at that time I had literally only been in nursing school for like 4 or 5 months, so applications were due in November. And the way that this specific nurse residency program worked was that you applied for the program itself, and then the various units would say how many openings they have for new grads and stuff like that, and then eventually you would be picked for an interview later on. You also gave some preference to what units you wanted to work on. So I think for that one, yeah, November was when applications were due. And then I think throughout like I think they went alphabetically because a lot of people in my nursing program got interviews with them. So they did phone screenings, I believe, and that was scheduled throughout end of December into January. I was at the end of it because my last name is at the end of the alphabet. And so that was like a phone screening. So basically they ask you basic questions. What units are you interested? I'll get more to some specific questions in a little bit, but I think most places have some sort of phone interview first with like HR or something, which is a little broader than like a specific unit. So after that, I was accepted, or I was asked to do an official interview, and those official interviews, at least for this nurse residency program, was like 3 days where everyone got interviewed, and all the managers from the different hospitals were there. And at this point you were interviewing for a specific unit. The one I was selected to interview for was a med-surg interview. I ended up actually never hearing back from them. To this day, they never told me that I didn't get the job, which is really funny. I mean, I obviously could have followed up, but I'd already been selected for my postpartum job, so I never actually followed up with them. But I keep forgetting sometimes that I never actually heard back from them. So then that leads me into my second job interview that I did. So for my position that I actually have, I believe I applied in like late February, and I was told by HR that it was a little early to be applying because they really wanted, like, if they had a full-time position out there, they really wanted to get that filled as soon as they could, and they weren't necessarily going to wait for me to graduate and take my NCLEX and stuff like that. So when I applied, I was like that I was actually going to get the job. But then I was actually selected for an interview, and again we did a nice little phone screening first and went from there, and then I was selected to do an actual in-person interview. And actually the day that I did my in-person interview, I looked online and they actually had a few other positions opened up in postpartum, so I kind of tacked those on, like I was interviewing for those positions as well in postpartum. That's just the way that my place works, is like each person's job is its own position. Like the one I was originally interviewing for was a 0.9 day and night rotating position, and then the one I added on was the one that I actually got, which is the 0.8 8s and 12 straight nights. That's just how my place works, depends on what you do. So I interviewed, I'd probably say like mid-March maybe. I interviewed for the job, and then I actually found out on April 1st. Oh my god, today's April 1st. Oh, that's funny. I actually found out exactly 2 years ago that I accepted my postpartum job. And then I actually applied to 2 other hospitals in the area. One of them was kind of a nurse residency program, not as crazy as the first one I had applied to, and then another local hospital. The other local hospital, I believe I had a phone interview for and was in the process of getting an actual interview, and the other one I actually had an actual interview scheduled, and the day I had that scheduled I found out I got the postpartum job, so I accepted that one and I did not go to my in-person interview. So I actually only had 2 in-person interviews. Yeah, so that's a little bit about me. I would say for applying for jobs, if you just go out and start looking, I would say like 3 to 4 months before you graduate. A lot of places are pretty open and know, like, you're a new grad, it's going to take you a little bit longer to get in there. Obviously nurse residency programs tend to be a little more rigorous in their application process, so just kind of be on the lookout of that. Just know what's around you, know what's available, what some requirements are for jobs, if they hire new grads, if they don't. So that's kind of a little bit about my interview process. Next, let's go into some tips for interviewing. My biggest tip, and I will probably say this every time I film a video like this, is to practice having answers, practice being asked questions. If you're someone who isn't great at thinking on their feet, it's definitely easier to have that practice under your belt. Do like a fake interview with some friends or family or something where you give them a list of questions and have them even ask some random questions that you just kind of have to make up answers for on the spot. Tip number 2 is know the mission and goal statement of the organization. So I think with all the phone interviews I did, they like kind of went through and they're like asked specific questions related to the mission and goal statements of the hospitals. So I think that that's probably a pretty common thing, is like, show me a time that you did this, and it's like related to their mission. So like it helps to just kind of know it ahead of time. They will tell you what it is too if they're asking you questions related to it, but I think it kind of helps ahead of time to have those. Tip number 3 is to always follow up after your interview. Phone interview and in-person interview, whether it be that day, the next day. It definitely is helpful to even just email them and say, hey, thank you so much for taking the time to interview me. I am really looking forward to hearing back from you. I feel like this is a great position. Like, just kind of being like, hey, don't forget about me, you know. I think it's a great way to just follow up and remind them of you. Tip number 4 is to bring a copy of your own resume, and also have a copy of some like questions you have for them. For sure, I think actually both my in-person interviews, they had copies of my resume, but we went through it piece by piece, like said, okay, tell me about this, tell me about this, tell me about this. So just kind of knowing that your resume is updated. And one of them, they didn't have my updated resume, so I actually brought an updated version of it. So always have a copy of your resume with you. And then also, like I said, some questions for them about how the unit works and stuff like that, which I'll get into in a little bit. Tip number 5 is that it's okay to like pause and need to take some time to think of an answer for a question. I wouldn't take more than like a minute to think about it, but just being like, can I just have a second to think of an answer? Because interviews are nerve-wracking. Like, they're scary, and when I get nervous, my brain does not function the way I want it to. So sometimes you just need to sit and take a second and just close your eyes and be like, okay, what are they asking me? Do I have an experience like this? And then kind of coming with an answer, because it's better than just like mumbling over your own words until you actually figure out what you're trying to say. And tip number 6 is to research commonly asked questions in interviews, general interviews and nursing specific interviews. I have some that I will be listing after this, so just keep on watching. But obviously there's like hundreds of more questions out there that are commonly asked. With that, let's get into some commonly asked questions. First thing that's probably going to be asked is like, why do you specifically want that job? Why do you want to work on that unit? Why that organization, you know? So just obviously this would be a great time to like reflect on their mission and goal statements and say, I really identify with this. Or just be honest, like, have you heard really awesome things about this unit? Did you have a great experience on this unit in clinicals or shadowing or something like that? Yeah, just making sure you're really letting them know like why you want to work on that specific unit. Another commonly asked question is like a time you dealt with a difficult patient. We've all dealt with difficult patients, and like kind of they just want to see kind of how you problem solve with that question. So I would always just kind of have some examples of like standout things you did or standout experiences that you had. Another commonly asked question is a time that you went above and beyond your expectations, and with this it's totally okay to like brag like, hey, I did this really awesome thing for this patient one time and it wasn't a requirement, but I wanted to do it. There's usually always a question about diversity, working with diverse patients, working with diverse age groups, diverse races, some sort of diversity questions. So make sure you kind of have an idea of that. I mean, we deal with diversity all the time. Another commonly asked question is a time that you made a mistake and how you learned from that experience and how it made you a better nurse and all that stuff. Like, we all make mistakes. It's okay to admit that you've made a mistake. It doesn't have to be a huge mistake. It can be a tiny little mistake, like, oh, I accidentally gave them 2 ibuprofen instead of 3, or like, you know, like small things. It can be a small thing, it can be a big thing, but what did you learn from that? That's the biggest point, that's the biggest takeaway that they are getting from that. Not the mistake you made, but how you learned from it. Kind of along with that, another question that I was asked in most of my interviews was, how do you handle criticism? I think some people are great at handling criticism, some people aren't great at it, but kind of use this and kind of talk about how you've done it in the past. If you're better at it now than you used to be, it's okay to use examples from clinical settings or job settings if you worked as a CNA, or if this is not your first nursing job you're interviewing for. Another commonly asked question is your strengths and weaknesses. I feel like this is really hard to talk about your strengths, but it's okay. You're selling yourself. Like, you gotta brag a little bit. It's okay. And then with weaknesses, usually I like to try and spin this to like be a positive thing. Like, I definitely stretch myself too thin sometimes, and I put others before myself sometimes, and that is a weakness of mine, but it also can be beneficial on a job sometimes. Keyword is sometimes, but I like to always kind of spin that into be a positive thing for myself. The next question that I have on here is not necessarily a commonly asked one, but when I was asked it, I was like, whoa, okay, I have not heard that one. It was to talk about a time where I had a disagreement with a coworker and how we resolved that issue. And that was really tricky for me to like think about, and I try to avoid conflict as much as I can, but I mean, working as a CNA, I've definitely had some disagreements with coworkers and stuff like that before, so kind of always have some random situations in your head. And then one of the last questions they're going to ask you are like your long-term career goals, and with this question what they're really gauging is like, how long are you going to be with them? Are you going to be with them forever? Are you going to be with them for a year and then go to NP school? Are you using this as a stepping stone to get somewhere else? Like, are you just looking for some experience? Not that any of those things are a negative, but they kind of want to know, how long are you actually going to be with them? So yeah, those are some of the most commonly asked questions. There's obviously way more out there that you can do some research on and look up, but having just genuine answers for these and not having to think super hard about them is helpful. I wouldn't have it too rehearsed because it also looks a little suspicious that way. So next up, I am just going to go into a few little other pieces of advice that I have. First being, if you have the chance to shadow the unit before you accept the job, I highly recommend it. It gives you a great opportunity to see how the workflow is, how the patient load is, how your coworkers would be, how like the environment of the unit is. I think that's really important, whether it be before you even interview, or if you had clinicals there, you obviously probably wouldn't need to shadow, but before you for sure accept the job, it's totally okay to be like, hey, is it okay if I come just shadow for like a few hours just to kind of get a feel before I accept this position? In COVID world, it might be a little more difficult to shadow, but it doesn't hurt to ask. And then I said this before, but asking the managers or whoever you are interviewing with questions is super duper important. I would say always have a list ready to go. Whenever I've interviewed, I had a list, but a lot of the times they didn't answer those things ahead of time. But knowing like biggest things is like the ratio of patients to nurse, ratio of CNA to nurse. Are there CNAs working on the unit? Is your position straight nights, straight days, straight PMs, rotating? How does rotation work? Is it like every day you rotate, or is it a little bit different? And a lot of stuff they'll talk to you about later on. You can also ask about like floating, like are you going to be floated to other units? How does that work? But honestly, just any general questions that you have about the unit, it's totally okay to ask, and they usually give you time to ask those questions as well. Lastly, I'm just going to quick go into a little bit of postpartum specifics. So if you were someone who was looking to get a job in postpartum world, here are just some tips and tricks that I have shared with people in the past. So obviously having some sort of experience is great. I actually never had any OB or postpartum experience in nursing school, but I do have a first degree, which is in human development and family studies, and I have worked with kiddos like my whole life, like babysitting, nannying, working at a daycare. So I have some sort of experience with parents and kids, not newborn babies, obviously. I think it really does help, even if you just get to go shadow for a day or have clinical experience. Like, it's awesome. Make sure you show some initiative on breastfeeding. My hospital actually had like a breastfeeding course that they provided for us to do, but if you want to like get a head start and like start looking up some like easy courses, there's some awesome great Instagram references too that I like to follow, so I'll have those linked below for you. Another important question for working on a postpartum unit is the ratios. I know these really vary based off state, depending on where you are. So at my hospital we have 3 couplets to 1 nurse if it's a normal couplet. Sometimes things change and we have different ones, but there are some that go up to 5, and I could not imagine taking on 5 couplets. So something to definitely ask about and look into, because you want to be able to make sure that you're able to give your patients all of the care that you can. Another important question is to look at the unit, and is if it's an LDRP, which is labor, delivery, postpartum recovery. So like labor and delivery and postpartum, they stay in the same room. It's all intertwined. Some hospitals like that have specific L&D nurses and postpartum nurses, but knowing if it's like a birthing center where there's different floors for everything, or if it is all combined, is important. That is it for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I hope it was helpful for a few of you. If you have interviewed before, I want you to comment below like the craziest question you were asked, because I feel like it's helpful for other people to see that, just to kind of know, because I feel like sometimes they throw in some weird questions, you know. Give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss more videos from me, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.